Now, a brief history. The Renaissance. What is actually the Renaissance? Many people actually use the word Renaissance but don't even know what it actually is. It's more of an approximation because it's not like, oh, the Renaissance began, in 1655 at 12 o'clock. No, it's not like, oh, we're in the Renaissance all of a sudden. No. It's something very, very ambiguous. And most historians tend to approximate this ambiguous range between the 14th to 17th century, and they kind of like label that as the Renaissance. But a lot of people didn't even realize they were in a historical the Renaissance. Like the people living in those times, it's not like they were aware. Oh, hey guys, we're living in the Renaissance. No, most people didn't even know that. Again, it's something that was very progressive, like slow and progressive. That's kind of how history works. But basically, it focused on reviving classical antiquity, Greek and Roman ideas, and basically fostering humanism, which emphasized human potential and individual experience. Basically, the Renaissance was very linked with, what followed the Renaissance was the Enlightenment, and these are very key, very important moments in history where basically humanity was like transitioning from like a lot of dogmatic thinking to more skeptical thinking, like thinking for themselves, really questioning things. And a lot of this had to do with like the Protestant Reformation, but I'm not gonna get into that really. The point is, a lot of individuality was really promoted during that period of history. And that's when people really started to express themselves a lot more. That's when they, particularly like rich people in those days, let's be honest, most of them people. But before the Renaissance, like before the 14th century, it was mostly like 99% of people that had access to read and just learn about things and exercise and do a bunch of artistic stuff. Were mostly rich people, really privileged people. Yeah, just really, really privileged people. But as things started to progress later after, the 14th, 15th, 16th, 17th century and beyond, then those activities were more accessible to everybody else, including, yeah, it was pretty much accessible to everyone else. And that's when we start to see a bunch of artistic innovations. We got Da Vinci, we got Michelangelo, we got just all these artists that I'm not really an expert in art history. Like, I'm gonna be honest, I'm not an expert in art history. I'm more of a tech guy and a philosophy guy. But yeah, we just basically just got all this emergence of, unique, beautiful artistic work, and it was due to this idea of really expanding individuality. And that was very important because basically it would this idea of taking things into my own, like basically reclaiming control, basically elevating the individual experience to a higher level. This idea of elevating the individual experience to a higher level in order to express myself, whether that be in an artistic manner. Also, it also flooded into the area of the intellectual dimension. So it wasn't just expressing myself artistically, it was also expressing intellectually. That's when the expressing the individual artistically, feeling my emotions and expressing them through artistic means, or understanding the world around me and expressing what I feel about the world around me through art. Now it was more about individual intellectualism. It was about questioning things, questioning religious ideas, questioning dogmatic ideas, questioning things that were, that were basically, that a lot of people, I wouldn't say forced to believe, I wouldn't say that, but just they didn't have the privilege to do nowadays. They didn't have like a computer, Google, to just do research. A lot like libraries weren't that accessible or anything, so people just believed whatever they were told. And yeah, I'm not gonna say it was some kind of um, conspiracy or none of that. No, it was just basic economics. People didn't have the money. People had to work to provide for their children and all that, which was totally understandable. That's how humanity progressed throughout history. It was pretty rough. Early advancements in science with a more observational approach influenced by philosophical and theological frameworks. So yeah, notable thinkers were Petrarch, Machiavelli, Erasmus. Petrarch, I believe, was the father of humanism, which again, it was just all about, really digging deep into the humanities and the individual experience and just really understanding humanity by studying history, theology, philosophy, and it was basically trying to like connect back with the past, specifically like the classical Greeks, basically, especially Greek philosophy. So it had a very interesting relationship with philosophy, the Renaissance, basically. And so, moving here through the flowchart, it renewed interest in ancient texts and critical thinking, moving away from medieval scholasticism. So, what's scholasticism? Scholasticism was started by the Catholic Church, I believe, and it was all about trying to understand the fundamental nature of the universe, the world. How does the world work? But it wasn't trying to understand how the world worked in the same way that modern scientists are doing it today. It was more so, okay, let's start with God. Okay, God exists, right? Okay, it's probably because we know that God exists, right? St. Thomas Aquinas talked about that. So, St. Thomas Aquinas proved God exists through metaphysical arguments, right? And now the Catholic Church is like, okay, so we want to understand if God created the world, then, and we want to connect more with God, and we want to, like, have a closer, more intimate relationship with God. I'm saying this in my own words, obviously. Then it's probably best for us to understand God's creation, basically. That was the purpose behind the main idea of science. If we want to understand God, then we may as well understand his creation. So that was what scholasticism was all about. But then it started, like, philosophy started to change. The sciences started to change. Philosophy transitioned from, like, more classical philosophy, Platonistic, Neoplatonistic philosophy, very influenced by Thomas Aquinas and Aristotle, to more modern philosophy. People went from metaphysics. Metaphysics is just questioning ultimate reality. So when you ask the questions, what is the meaning to life? Why am I here? What happens next? You are doing metaphysics, basically. Metaphysics has nothing to do with, oh, I am meditating and, opening up my 7 chakras. It has nothing to do with that. I'm not here to criticize or anything. I'm just saying that that's not metaphysics, right? You can do that, whatever. It's not metaphysics. Metaphysics is a branch of philosophy that studies ultimate reality. And ultimate reality is trying to understand the fundamental questions of existence. So, like, what is existence? Why, do I exist? Do I not exist? Like, or, like, what is the essence of this water bottle, right? So, what is the essence of this water bottle? If I remove the cap, is it still a water bottle? If I remove the water in the bottle, is it still a water bottle, right? But philosophy started to change ever since an individual called René Descartes showed up to the scene, right? I talked about René Descartes in my introduction, right? And he said, okay, so we're asking all these metaphysical questions and focus more on the individual, which is very connected to Renaissance, because after that it followed the Enlightenment. We'll get to that. But basically Descartes changed philosophy forever. He was like, okay, we're asking questions about God, we're asking questions about his nature, we're trying to understand ultimate reality, right? Is reality made of mathematics? Is reality just made of some kind of universal substance, whatever it is? Or is it just everything all material, right? Is everything just material? A lot of scientists nowadays are materialists. A lot of them. They're naturalists. The only thing that exists in reality is just the physical stuff. And our goal is to understand what that physical stuff is, right? But, in those times where they were doing metaphysics, they were like, okay, but that's an assumption. So Descartes was just like, okay, we're asking all these metaphysical questions. Great, beautiful. But how do I know that we can actually answer these questions in the first place? Like, are we even thinking properly? Are we actually really thinking properly? Are we, like, how do I know? How do I know that we can actually know the fundamental nature of reality? How do I know that, how can we actually be certain about reality in general? Like, what if I'm dreaming? How do I differentiate between a dream and the real world? I guess there are some kind of differences, right? That we can talk about, like maybe a lot of, there's a lot of differences between the dream world and reality, but that's not the case. The only reason why we can talk about the difference between the dream world and like reality is we're awake. But when we're dreaming, we're not even aware that we're dreaming. Unless we're lucid dreaming, which is where you're aware that you're dreaming. But most of the time, we're not aware that we're dreaming. So when our consciousness is not aware that we're dreaming and we are dreaming, how do we differentiate between reality and the dream? The senses fool us. They actually fool us a lot of the time. Like if I take a pencil and I put it in this water bottle, it will distort, like it will distort the visual of the pencil. It'll make it look as if the pencil was broken. And that's just an illusion, right? Created by the water, right? And we can explain that phenomena with physics. But our senses, that's just an example of how our senses can fool us. And there are many ways our senses can fool us, even if doing physics. Sometimes maybe we're doing experimental physics and maybe the machines that we're using to do experimental physics, we might not even know, like how can we trust the machines that are doing these physical observation for us? What if there's something wrong with the machine, and what if we just don't know that there's something wrong with the machine and we're very confident in our calculation? That's actually a very common problem in philosophy of science and just experimental physics in general, which I'm sure has very interesting solutions, right? But again, I'm not here to get into that. I'm just trying to like lay out certain skeptical problems that Descartes was starting to note. And one of his really, really great contributions to philosophy was, or thought experiments to philosophy, was his evil genius thought experiment, right? He was like, okay, what can I actually be certain of? Okay, maybe I can be certain in mathematics, right? I could probably be certain in mathematics, right? 1 + 1 = 2. That sounds reasonable, right? 1 + 1 = 2 will always be true, even if I am dreaming, right? So whether I'm dreaming or whether I'm awake, 1 + 1 will always equal 2. A triangle will always have 3 sides, right? But if you really think about it, what if there's an evil genius? What if my brain is somehow in a vat? Or what if I'm in the Matrix, right? If any of, like, I'm pretty sure most of you have seen the movie or the trilogy Matrix. So you know the premise, right? What if we're all, we think reality, but really this is all just a simulation? For Descartes, it was a brain in a vat. What if my brain in a vat and some kind of evil genius is making me believe that this is reality? And what if this evil genius is making me believe that 2 + 2 = 4, right? So can we trust our mathematics? Certainly we can trust logic. We can trust reasoning. Like I cannot doubt in logic and reasoning, right? But logic and reasoning is not the same as mathematics. And I'm not going to dive into that as well because that just takes us to a whole other rabbit hole, which I would love to talk about, but later on. So as you can see, Descartes really took thinking, really took reasoning to another level. This is known as skepticism, where you start off with something and you start to deconstruct it all the way down to its roots. This is called first principles thinking, but I'll get into that soon. But let's just move on. So, following the flow. So after the 17th century, it takes us to the Enlightenment, right? So all of this is debatable, really, like the whole Renaissance and Enlightenment, the exact periods and everything. It's all debatable. Like I said, it's not like you can just pinpoint exactly when this began or when this ended. But anyways, so the Enlightenment, it's centered on reason and logic. So reason, logic, and empirical evidence. So it emphasized individual rights and skepticism on traditional authority. So Descartes was skeptical on about everything, really. So he was trying to doubt everything, and he was trying to say, okay, but what can I be certain of? And Descartes basically said, the one thing that I can actually be certain of is that I am, that I exist. I think, therefore I am. In other words, I cannot doubt in my own existence, because to doubt my own existence, because what am I doing when I'm doubting something? I'm thinking, right? So if I am thinking, it's impossible for me to doubt my existence, because as soon as I doubt my existence, I say, I don't think I exist, or I don't exist. What am I doing there? I'm thinking, which presupposes my existence. So that's the one thing. I might have not formally, said it 100%. I'm just saying it in my own words. But that's basically what René Descartes was trying to say. So that's the one thing that we can be certain of. And then basically Descartes went on to the existence of God using pure reason. The main thing that I want you to focus on is René Descartes' I think, therefore I am. But that's kind of what Descartes did. Of course, there's some problems with that thinking on Descartes' side that a lot of philosophers have realized, but it's pretty interesting to dive deep. But we transition from like humanism, from like, individuality, artistic expression, and we focused more on rationalism and empiricism. So we got individuals like John Locke, philosophers like Locke, Kant, Voltaire. So these philosophers were like, guys, let's focus on observation. Let's focus on, because maybe we shouldn't like exactly take the route that Rene Descartes took, where it was all about starting off with reason. Maybe we should start off with observation, right? Let's start off with observation. Yeah, we probably might not be trust our senses 100%, but there's still something. They're still useful, right? Again, I'm saying this in my own words. They obviously said it in a more rigorous manner. So let's just use our observation. Let's just use thinking. Let's just use a systematic approach to observation so that we can extract meaningful insights from the world. Specifically, Karl Popper, I believe his name was, he formalized this more into like what we know now as the scientific method. I think it started off with this guy called Bacon. I know it's a funny name, but that's the entire history of philosophy of science. I'm not going to get into that because it's super dense. But I just wanted to like kind of teach you a high level overview of what was going on in the Renaissance. Because a lot of people talk about the Renaissance, but they don't really know what the Renaissance was or what it was about. So let's just move on. Yes, it had a cultural impact, because, individual freedom kind of like, it implies, this idea of equality, social justice, and all of that, right? And it started a bunch of debates, I'm not going to get into that mess, but you know what I'm talking about. So let's talk about something called technology. So technology enhances thought. It enhances thinking, enhances the individual's ability to think. And so we talked about the subject. We talked about like, where do we begin? We begin with reason. We begin with thinking. We begin with the subject, right? Because that's what we can be certain of. We're experiencing something, right? We're experiencing something, right? Whether we're dreaming, whether we're a brain in a bat, whether we're in a matrix. One thing that we can be certain of is the fact that we exist and that we're experiencing stuff, right? We're just experiencing this stuff. We're having this experience that we call the human experience, right? Okay. Now, we know that we can trust our reasoning, we can trust logic, right? We cannot doubt logic, because as soon as I doubt logic, I'm using logic to doubt logic, right? So, baseline, right? That's the basics. We're starting off from ground zero. Now, technology enhances our thinking. So, I believe that the purpose of AI, of artificial intelligence, of technology in general, first of all, technology, what is really technology all about? Technology, the way I like to define technology, is basically a medium. That's all it is. It's just a medium. Or maybe using less abstract words, it's just a tool. There's nothing esoteric about it. It's just a tool, right? So a medium, how I like to define it, is that which serves a specific purpose, a specific end, a telos, as Aristotle might put it. A telos is a purpose, a final end, a final goal, right? So technology serves a specific end. But this end is defined by who? Us, the individual, the subject. So this has a specific purpose, has a specific telos, has a specific end. But technology is a lot more than that, especially if you define it as a medium that serves a specific purpose. And that's really all it is. It's just a tool that serves a specific purpose. The purpose is defined by the individual. We add meaning to the tool. In the same way that we create meaning in our own lives, right? Whatever you think about that, we also add meaning to technology or to stuff, right? We add meaning to stuff. We say, hey, this thing right here, I am going to give it this value, I'm going to give it this meaning, I'm going to give it this purpose, and it's going to serve this particular end, which is to hydrate me, right? Or help me store water in this so that I can drink the water bottle so that I can be hydrated. It's a very basic idea, definition of technology. Nothing out of this world. But it's very important that we start off from these basic principles. And that's all technology is. And technology is serving a specific purpose. But then you start to ask the question, okay, but what is the final purpose of everything, right? What is the final purpose of humanity? Now we're starting to get into some very deep philosophy, right? It's like, what is the final purpose of all humanity? And this is something that you're just gonna have to like think for yourself. Now, because that's the idea behind all of philosophy, is to think for yourself. Okay, what do you believe is the final purpose of everything? What do you believe is the meaning to life, right? And that you're gonna have to really like dig deep to it. Now, for me, the way I like to define it is, first of all, we begin to exist. We begin to experience stuff. Now, since we begin to exist, right, we're experiencing stuff, that is something that we can be certain of. I believe that the meaning of life, the meaning to life, is to expand this field of awareness, right? Life, how do you define life? Life is just a thing, a thinking thing, I might put it, right? We're just thinking things that is experiencing stuff. And our goal is just to enhance or to expand this field of awareness. What do I mean by that? Basically, the meaning to life in itself is an absurd question to me. I don't think that the question is properly placed or properly asked. We don't, like, just the question itself is absurd, in my opinion. Because the meaning to life, when you ask that question, what is the meaning to life? You're kind of already presupposing an answer, right? Because the meaning to life is just life. If you're asking the meaning to life, it's probably because you're already alive. You're already aware of your own existence. A rock is not asking the question, what is the meaning to my life? No, a rock is just a rock. It's obviously not going to ask that question. But if a rock really is aware of its own existence and asks that question, then all of a sudden the question itself becomes meaningless. It's just life. It's just self-awareness, right? The goal is just awareness. And to expand this field of awareness as much as possible, ad infinitum, right? To infinity and beyond, for those who are like, Toy Story fans. But if we're to take that definition of the meaning of life, or just see a variable, right? So if the final purpose of all human beings is just to, expand their consciousness, right? Expand their field of awareness, expand their aliveness, if you want to call it that, then that's what technology is to be about. It's supposed to help us, aid all of us, in our field of awareness and expanding our consciousnness. Hey, technology does that nowadays. Like, let's be real. There's a lot of trash talk on Instagram, and yes, Instagram is can become a drug. It can become a drug. Social media in general can become a drug. It has become a drug, and we can become very addicted to it, and it has a lot of bad things, but there's also a lot of great things that come from Instagram. There's a lot of great things that come from YouTube, right? If you're watching this video, you're watching it from YouTube. So technology is not bad. It's not good or bad. It's neutral. Again, we are the ones that define the meaning to the particular technology that we're using. So it's not the technology that's bad. It's the intention behind the technology that makes it good or bad. So Instagram is not bad. It's just my intention with Instagram, right? If I'm just using Instagram maybe to share, I don't know, to get some really short value accounts that I follow or whatever, I don't know, I don't care, or just to message my friend, or have a nice experience. Well, what does that do? That enhances my human experience. Of course, if I take that to the extreme, then yes, it can become unhealthy. That's why everything has to have some sort of balance, as Aristotle talked about. But anyways, so there's many dimensions that technology enhances. It can enhance our physique. It could help us improve our fitness, right? With, like watches like Fitbit, or calculators that help me calculate my BMI and all that. I don't know, it could help me translate, right? If I'm going to a foreign country and I need to translate things, look up facts, right? One thing that technology really does is enhances thought. It enhances thinking. And that is very important, because if we want to become Renaissance men, right, in this new era, then we really need to take our thinking to the next level. If we do not take control of our own thinking, then others will take control of our own thinking.